That zone coming up from the Fever. Onyenwere sets her feet, hits the jumper.
The story unfolding in the WNBA right now is one of the most fascinating, polarizing, and frankly eye-opening developments in the modern era of women's basketball. And it centers around one simple but seismic reality: the league's ratings and popularity have collapsed in dramatic fashion the moment Caitlin Clark was sidelined with an injury. A reality that has not only stunned fans but also forced owners, executives, and media outlets to face questions they were hoping they could avoid, because while the WNBA had been celebrating a surge of attention, ticket sales, and cultural relevance in the early part of the 2025 season, that momentum has screeched to a halt with Clark's absence, exposing a fragility in the foundation of the league's growth that many had warned about but few wanted to admit publicly. And now, as the numbers pour in, the conversations get louder, and the fans react with frustration and anger. The debate over what the WNBA is, what it wants to be, and whether it can stand on its own without the gravitational pull of one player has become impossible to ignore. So let's break down exactly what has happened, why it matters, and what the implications are for the future of women's basketball. Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever's second-year guard and reigning Rookie of the Year, had already transcended the sport by the time she stepped into the league. Arriving from Iowa with the kind of hype and national recognition no women's player in history had brought before, pulling in massive audiences at the college level, selling out arenas, and becoming a household name in a way that even legends like Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, or Maya Moore never quite achieved in their collegiate days. And when she made the leap to the WNBA, the surge followed her. As ratings for Fever games shattered records, merchandise sales skyrocketed, and suddenly networks that once hesitated to give prime coverage to women's basketball were bidding for slots to showcase Clark's games. For months, the narrative around the league was celebratory, with commentators praising the WNBA's long-awaited breakthrough, advertisers throwing more money into sponsorship deals, and owners finally seeing a return on investments that for decades had been more about passion than profit. But then came the fateful moment on May 24, 2025, when Clark strained her left quad, an injury that sidelined her for what has now stretched into 5 games. And almost overnight the numbers told a devastating story. According to Nielsen data cited by USA Today, ratings for nationally televised WNBA games cratered by 55%, falling from an average of 1.81 million viewers per game, with Clark on the floor, to just 847,000 without her. And for Indiana Fever games specifically, the decline was just as stark, down more than half. Numbers that aren't just disappointing, but catastrophic for a league that had finally convinced broadcasters and advertisers that women's basketball was a sustainable mainstream product. To put that in perspective, the drop-off in viewers is the equivalent of the NBA losing tens of millions overnight if LeBron James or Steph Curry went down. And while star-driven audiences are not unusual in sports, the degree to which the WNBA fortunes have been tied to one young player has become impossible to downplay. Clark, averaging 19 points, 3 assists, and 6 rebounds per game before the injury, including a dazzling triple-double in the season opener, isn't just producing on the court. She is the story, the ratings magnet, the cultural lightning rod, and with her sidelined, casual fans, the ones who had flocked to the league for the first time, have simply tuned out, unwilling or uninterested in watching games without her. A reality that has sparked a furious debate about whether the WNBA has done enough to cultivate a broader base of stars and narratives to sustain interest when Clark isn't playing. Owners, typically cautious in their public statements, are beginning to acknowledge the problem. In a recent Sports Illustrated report, one owner, speaking anonymously, admitted, "We knew Caitlin was a big draw, but nobody expected the floor to fall out like this. We've got to figure out how to keep fans engaged without relying on one person." While another told Yahoo Sports bluntly, "The numbers are a gut punch. We've been riding this wave of excitement, but it's clear, we haven't built the foundation we thought we had." These aren't throwaway comments. They're confessions that behind the scenes, panic is setting in. Because the league's biggest fear that its success was too dependent on one player has been confirmed in real time. And with networks, sponsors, and fans all paying attention, the pressure to respond has never been greater. Meanwhile, fans have flooded social media with raw, unfiltered reactions. many pointing out what the league itself seems reluctant to admit. Caitlin Clark is the engine driving interest, and pretending otherwise only alienates the very audience the WNBA has been trying to capture. On X, formerly Twitter, one user posted, "What? I was assured Angel Reese was the real draw. Could it have actually been Caitlin?" While another wrote, "The Caitlin Clark effect is real. People trying to downplay her impact are just hating." And yet another quipped with biting sarcasm, "You're not supposed to say that out loud. You must hate women if you point out the obvious." This backlash has even taken on an organized form, with some fans openly suggesting that they are boycotting WNBA games in protest. Not just because Clark is injured, but because they believe the league and its media partners have mishandled her stardom, either downplaying her accomplishments, failing to protect her from overly physical play, or spreading credit so broadly that it dilutes her impact. A perception that has hardened in certain circles and fueled a sense of resentment that Clark supporters feel toward the league itself. Analyst Rachel Dita added fuel to this fire by arguing on a recent podcast that part of the ratings collapse can indeed be explained by a boycott, saying, "A lot of people stopped watching because they don't want to give viewership to any other teams or players after how the league treated Clark and her supporters." A claim that, whether accurate or not, has intensified the debate, with some fans agreeing and others dismissing it as excuse-making. But either way, the theory underscores how emotionally invested Clark's fanbase is and how volatile that relationship with the WNBA has become. And while some dismiss these boycotts as overblown, the numbers once again tell a sobering story. When the Indiana Fever played the Chicago Sky on June 10, 2025, without Clark, the broadcast on CBS drew 1.92 million viewers, which sounds respectable, until you compare it to the Fever Sky season opener, where Clark played and the audience reached 2.7 million. A staggering difference of nearly 800,000 viewers. While the All-Star Game in Indianapolis, which should have been a showcase event for the league, saw ratings dip 36% compared to last year, and secondary ticket prices nosedived from $121 to $64 the moment news broke that Clark wouldn't be suiting up. These aren't coincidences. They're direct consequences of one player's absence. And they reveal the uncomfortable truth that the WNBA's surge in popularity has been less about a rising tide lifting all boats and more about one superstar dragging the league into the spotlight almost single-handedly. The big question now is whether the league can adapt. Historically, sports leagues that rely too heavily on one star face turbulence when that star declines, retires, or, as in this case, gets injured. And the only way to sustain long-term success is to broaden the base of appeal, create compelling rivalries, and market multiple stars so that fans have a reason to watch regardless of who's on the floor. The NBA faced this challenge when Michael Jordan retired in 1993, and again in 1999. But it managed to survive and eventually thrive because players like Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and eventually LeBron James stepped into the spotlight, ensuring continuity of interest. The WNBA, however, hasn't yet proven it can replicate that model. And with players like A'ja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, and Angel Reese struggling to draw comparable numbers to Clark, the task ahead is daunting. The harsh reality is that casual fans, the ones who make the difference between niche popularity and mainstream relevance, aren't tuning in for the league. They're tuning in for Clark. And until that changes, the WNBA's fortunes will remain tethered to her health, her performance, and her availability. This moment, then, is both a crisis and an opportunity. A crisis because the fragile growth of the league has been exposed, but also an opportunity because it forces owners, executives, and media partners to rethink how they market, how they tell stories, and how they build something sustainable beyond one transcendent talent. And the choices they make in the coming months could very well determine whether this surge in interest becomes a permanent step forward for women's sports, or just another fleeting moment tied to the career of one extraordinary player.
Answers with a three. What a first quarter for Jordan Canada, who's
Former NBA All-Star Jeff Teague might have said it best when he summed up the WNBA's current crisis with a blunt, almost painful truth: "There go the views." Ouch. Those 4 words cut right to the heart of the issue, because what we are witnessing isn't just a normal dip in interest. It's a full-blown collapse of momentum. And it's being felt everywhere, from the television broadcasts that once proudly touted record-breaking numbers to the ticket counters where demand has dried up so dramatically that some seats are now selling for as little as $3. Yes, $3. the price of a cup of gas station coffee, a shocking reality for a league that just weeks ago was celebrating sold-out arenas and an unprecedented wave of mainstream attention. And the fallout has been immediate, undeniable, and devastating. Before Caitlin Clark's injury, the WNBA was on pace to cross a historic milestone, projected revenue soaring past the billion-dollar mark for the first time in its history, largely thanks to her star power and the cultural phenomenon she brought with her from college basketball, where she was not only the biggest name in the women's game but one of the biggest in all of sports. Period. But now, with her sidelined and another hyped rookie star, Paige Buchers, suffering an injury around the same time, the league has lost two of its brightest young names in the span of a few weeks, and that double blow has ripped a gaping hole in the WNBA's marketing narrative, leaving executives scrambling to hold on to the casual fans who had finally started tuning in. Layer on top of that the timing, the NBA Finals commanding global attention, the Stanley Cup Final drawing hockey fans, and the French Open pulling in tennis audiences. You have the perfect storm, a collision of circumstances that has left the WNBA fighting for oxygen in a crowded sports landscape, its momentum slowed to a crawl. Its golden goose sitting on the sidelines in street clothes. The owners and league officials know this, which is why all eyes, all hopes, and all prayers right now are on Caitlin Clark's recovery, because fair or not, the future of this season, maybe even the next phase of WNBA growth, feels like it rests on her return. Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White has been clear that they are being extremely cautious, not rushing Clark back onto the floor, insisting that she won't return until she is 100%. But the whispers of hope are already building, because Clark has begun ramping up basketball activities, practicing in controlled drills, taking light contact, and that timeline has set the stage for a potential return as early as June 14th, in what just so happens to be a nationally televised, high-profile matchup against the powerhouse New York Liberty, a game that analysts are already calling a must-watch, with fans predicting a ratings spike the second she takes the court. That matchup has been circled in red ink, not just by Fever fans, but by league officials, TV executives, and advertisers. Because everyone knows that if Clark plays, millions will tune in, and the numbers will jump. But lurking beneath that short-term excitement is the much bigger, much scarier question. What happens after that? Will those casual viewers stick around once Clark is back in action? Or will they once again vanish the next time she sits out, or heaven forbid suffers another setback? That is the existential crisis facing the WNBA right now, and it is why owners are not just watching Clark's rehab but also beginning to whisper about long-term strategy. Because they know this dependence on one player is not sustainable. It is a vulnerability that threatens the very growth they have been celebrating. The truth is brutal but clear. If one player's injury can cut your audience in half, you don't have a league built on solid ground. You have a league built on a single pillar, and that pillar is human, fragile, and subject to the realities of sports injuries, fatigue, and time. The conversations happening behind closed doors are starting to seep out, and several ideas are floating around. One of the most prominent is the push to manufacture and market rivalries. The way the NBA did in its golden eras. Think Magic versus Bird, Lakers versus Celtics. Stories so compelling that fans tuned in regardless of who was injured or what the standings looked like. Because the narrative itself was irresistible, imagine the WNBA being able to package Clark versus Angel Reese as a modern-day duel, or Liberty versus Aces as a heavyweight clash of styles and stars. The kind of narratives that can pull in not just die-hard fans but casuals who crave drama, as much as they crave highlights. Another strategy under discussion is the aggressive marketing of other stars. Players like Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, and Breena Stewart, all of whom have individual followings but have yet to cross into the must-watch stratosphere for casual fans. The league has to figure out how to elevate them, how to make their games, their personalities, and their stories resonate on a national stage, because right now, the contrast between Clark's drawing power and everyone else's is exposing a painful gap. Scheduling is another point of debate, weakening the calendar to avoid direct competition with the NBA Finals or other massive sports events could help. Though pulling that off in practice is far from simple, given television contracts and arena availability, but make no mistake, none of this will be easy, because the WNBA's reliance on Clark has exposed a structural problem that marketing slogans and quick fixes can't cover up. And now the owners, executives, and even the players themselves are under pressure to adapt quickly. Television networks and corporate sponsors, who just a month ago were tripping over themselves to get a piece of the WNBA's hot streak, are now nervous.